Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another instalment in the Sydney Railroad build. If you're watching the previous episode, you'll have seen me complete the large L-shaped workbench that goes under the eventual harbour area. This week I'm going to go back to where I left off and continue with the flyover and the two opposing grades of the two legs of the Y. And as the title of this video may have hinted, this week there are a few things that I just didn't do right the first time. I'm presenting them here anyway in the hope that you can all learn from my mistakes. So without further ado, let's just head out to the workshop and make those mistakes. With the area around the workbench complete, the next task is to get the sub-road bed continued around this 180-degree curve, the last leg of the Y, which needs to come into a ramp down beside this one. And they will eventually join up round about just past the end of this frame here. So my target for today is to get the benchwork for those two grades built all the way along here. It may look simple, but there are actually a few pitfalls I have to avoid. I will get into those later. So I'm just going to turn the camera off and get to work. I will check in with you in a bit. Well, I'm back again already. If you look closely at the shadows, you'll see the sun hasn't even moved since the last clip. I mentioned there may be pitfalls to avoid. Well, here's one I found already that I wasn't expecting. I forgot to square up this frame yesterday when I built it, and it wanted to sit about ½ an inch out of square. The aisle at this point is supposed to be 36¼ inches, and it wanted to sit at 35¾ So I put this brace on, and I'll have to finish building this area with that brace in place, and that will hold it straight. Anyway, with that out of the way, let me now get back to work. Well, I have now modified this corner. If you recall earlier, I said I had to put this brace on because it wouldn't stay straight. It was pinching the aisle by about ½ an inch. So what I did was cut this joint apart with the multi-saw, and I shortened the back frame and then screwed it back together again. I suspect that the frame next to it wasn't quite square, so now that has fixed that problem rather than forcing it. I still have this brace on because I want to make sure that I don't push it out of alignment while I'm working on it. But once I have some more stiffness in, that can come off. I just thought it'd be worth sharing that with you. I'm going to get back to work now, and I'll check in with you again later. Well, that is this area mocked up. I've got all these curved pieces of benchwork that were cut for me on a CTC router, and they do make it so much easier than having to mess around with a jigsaw. Next thing I'm going to do is join two of these together with a splice plate, making sure that the splice plate is not in the way of the tracks below it. And then I will get these two benchwork ends cut off to length, and then I'll see about supporting it on risers. So let me get on with all of that, and I will be right back. Well, this end curve is now complete, or benchwork for it is complete. This falls down at slightly less than 2%, and as I mentioned before, it will join up just after the end of this board. So that is the easy part done. The next part has to be built as a separate section. I can't have it permanently attached to this frame because it will be too big to go through the hole in the basement ceiling. So let me get back to work, and I'll check in with you again later. Don't go away. Well, that is the section that supports the track. Note how I've put a wide piece of plywood on the top. The grade will be added on top of that. I wanted something that was wide enough to give it lateral stiffness. The middle support will be part of the bracket that supports the upper level. And before I can really continue on this area, I need to get those brackets started. So what I'm going to do is get the easy one built first, and then see how much I need to modify it to make it work here. And then once I've done that one, then I can work out exactly what I need in the middle. I have it more or less worked out, but I've got to make sure that every piece works and that nothing blocks any previous piece in. Because if it doesn't come apart the way it should, it'll be disastrous. So I'm just taking my time, I'm not rushing it. I need to make sure I think through each piece. So let me get back to work and I'll check in with you again later. Well, last night I realized that I'd forgotten to make a clip before I went in. Here are the first two posts for supporting the upper deck. There will be a double beam across the top where the top deck is cantilevered out, more or less as I showed you on previous railroads. The only difference with this one being that it has to be wider because I've got a couple of tracks through the middle of it. This one is split between the two frames, and the right side of it has to be screwed only, it can't be glued. Well, the parts that are on are glued, but the back half of it has to be able to come off along with the top piece for transportation so that it fits down the client's basement stairs. Anyway, before I continue in this direction, I've got to make a slight adjustment to the grade. It's too high. Originally, I thought it wasn't a problem because I was just planning on moving the junction that's going to be at the end of this board into the middle of the helix instead, figuring that I had the extra length, but I don't. If I do that, the reversing loop will be too short for its longest train. And also I'm going to be running into clearance problems with the helix. It'll be more awkward now than it would have been if I'd thought about it before I built those posts. But not to worry, I'll just get that fixed and I will be right back. Well, I have now lowered the grade around this end. It's half an inch lower than it was. This is what was originally on the drawing, with a 3.5 inch rise from one deck to the other. You can see how I had to notch the sub-road bed. There's about 1/4 inch of clearance there, which is plenty. That is the absolute tallest car ever to run in normal service in the US, the double stack with 2 high cube containers. Of course, to test the clearance is that close, I had to make sure I put the foam rubber road bed and a piece of track in as well, rather than just guessing. With that overpass lowered by 1/2 inch and the grade steepened very slightly, it now works out perfectly. The level in the distance is at the exact same 2% as the rest of the grade. It didn't take long to fix it, but it was really annoying when I realized that it was wrong. Well, I've now made all the pieces for the rest of the falling grade. There's a 2 inch wide strip of 1/2 inch plywood and a long tapered piece. It needed to be 1 3/16 to nothing over 55 inches. I elected to do it in 2 halves, using a parallel piece that's wider than it needs to be. That way, once I've got the first wedge cut, I can trim the other half on the table saw quite easily. And where the plywood drops down to the same level as the other one, I had to cut a piece out. It's about a 2 foot long cutout. Next thing I've got to do is just permanently attach it. So let me get on with that and I'll be right back. Well, there is that grade finished. It meets the other one where it's supposed to. In order to retain the lateral stiffness, I filled that saw cut with glue. So these two pieces are actually glued together as well as screwed. Plenty more to get on with today. So let me get back to work and I'll check in with you later. Over the weekend, I was thinking about this curve, this flyover, and the amount of clearance I had over the double stacks. So I've modified the grade slightly. Instead of having the flyover flat across the tracks and having the vertical curve here, I've continued the grade up a little bit more and put the vertical curve over the tracks, meaning that this portion of the curve has been shimmed up somewhat. It gives quite a bit of extra clearance, probably 3/16 on that track and a good 1/4 inch on that one. And I'm happier now with the amount of clearance we have. Well, that's all for this week. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you found it useful or interesting, or both. And hope to see you back next time, where I will continue with framing up the Central Peninsula. So in the meantime, thanks for watching, and bye for now.